Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call to order the November 20th Lake Washington School Board meeting. I will entertain a motion to approve the November 20th agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Director Bernard, seconded by Director Bleasner. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries. Our first item on the agenda is public comment. On a monthly basis, the Board of Directors provides an opportunity for public comment. There are multiple avenues for feedback, including email, calls, and letters. This isn't a question and answer session. If you want to talk, have a dialogue with us, that's for after the business meeting is over or at another time, but we're certainly doing our best to listen. Over there you'll see a lovely little stoplight. When each speaker gets 3 minutes, after the first 2 minutes it'll turn yellow. That's a sign that you have 1 minute left. When it turns red, please wrap it up. That said, it's always best if you have a piece to speak that you leave us with a written copy of it as well. So if you have written material, please do leave it with Diane. It's important for the purposes of public comment. We don't take public comment on individual personnel or named staff during board meetings. And that's it. Now, this evening, I've got one person signed up. And so, Aaron, the floor is yours, and I believe that the mic is on.
I'll give a hand out.
Great.
So
Fantastic. Yep. And sorry, if this is your first time speaking here, you are on camera.
Okay.
It's broadcast for posterity, so
Yeah.
smile.
All right.
Okay, you're good.
All right. Well, thanks for taking our comment tonight. So I'll just tell a little story. We're in the Alcott Northeast 80th area. That's now going to be proposed again, changed to the Redmond Ridge East area. We were in the Dickinson feeder pattern that went to Evergreen, that then went to East Lake. And during I think it was 2015, right? Last time we did the boundary stuff, we got moved to Alcott. And that we could handle that because we stayed in kind of the same feeder, ended up going to Evergreen and back to East Lake. And this time, with the scenarios that were originally posted, well, not the original, the previous to the last two, we had A, B, C, and D. So B, C, and D, we remained in the same feeder pattern. And so we're like, hey, 3 out of 4, we're looking pretty good. And then the votes came in, and overall, the percentage of the votes, I don't know what the actual count on each rank for the scenarios were, but the percentage for A was 47%, 49%, and 51% elementary, middle, and high school. B was the one that we're like, hey, let's just vote for B. It's the one we like. Any of the other ones would have worked. And that was 40%, 35, 36. Didn't quite make it. But when you total B, C, and D, which all pretty much kept the same feeder pattern, the percentages are higher than A. So it was really disappointing when we went to the next part of the process and both scenarios proposed for the final selection for the boundary committee and you guys didn't include any of our original feeder pattern. What I gave you tonight was a map of our area, which shows the rural nature of where we're at. It's always been rural. Redmond Ridge didn't exist. It's a master planned urban development, which had to provide land for schools. So they provided the land for the schools for that area. And now they're building the schools, and they're going to be finished, and so you would assume that the folks from that area would go to those schools. And now we're being transplanted again to that area, which isn't at all connected to where we are. So I sent you guys the email to say, hey, please take a look. This doesn't at all really maintain neighborhood connections, which I hope that the process would try to restore from last time. And just it's troubling for us because our kids, they've made friendships with kids at Dickinson, and they've maintained them while they're at Alcott, and we're hoping we'd get back to Evergreen, and now they won't. So it's just, I think you guys pretty much are at where you're at, but I'd urge you to, in the future, really look at these neighborhood connections and the history of those, because it's really important. So I think that's what I got. Oh, one more little tidbit. I do work for the city of Redmond, and I know a lot about the development. There's about 2,900 units. Can I keep going just for a little? I just looked today, so there's about 2,700 new units in apartments only downtown that'll be finished by the time that the projections are done for, did I print this? I did print it. 2,913 new housing units downtown, plus some single family in the city. And for your 21-22 projections, you had about 2,261. So there's like I don't know if each unit means 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids. It depends where you're at. So downtown, you may get, every other unit has a kid in it. But you guys are at 2,161. So I'm just looking out for future growth and hoping that when you look at that, we own land, we're here to stay. Apartments are more transient, and I think it's probably hard to plan for that. But when you do, to consider, well, let's not displace folks that have built homes, live in homes, bought homes, versus, I don't know how you do that. It's probably not a fair way to do it, but we'd rather see, folks that are more transient in nature be bused somewhere to a new school where you have capacity versus moving folks that are permanent residents. So thank you for your time tonight.
So Aaron was my one sign-in. Does anybody else?
Can I speak?
Absolutely. Just tell us who you are and where you're.
My name's Christy Vath, and my kids currently, that is my husband Aaron, and I want to add a few things to the issues at hand. I want to put a face to the numbers, and I know it's number crunching, I know it's diversity, all of these things that are important, and I don't take lightly that there are going to be unhappy people with changes. But what I am seeing is that my daughter, who is going into 4th grade next year, will be at her 3rd school. Kids are resilient to a point, but kids also make early childhood friends. My friends today are my friends I met in elementary school, and I can say that there's a lot of people. It doesn't only affect school, it affects community involvement. The whole PTSA is having to turn over at Alcott because of these boundary changes. So if you want community participation, you want me to participate in my school, let's keep the boundaries that change. We were promised that the boundaries would be reverted once the bond passed. The bond passed. We are not part of Redmond Ridge. We have been solid at our home for 14 years. I was Lake Washington School District product. That is the reason why we are in Lake Washington School District. And this is disruptive. Some kids are resilient. My younger child, probably who will be going into 1st grade or 2nd grade next year, she'll do fine. My older child, she's gonna end up in counseling. And to me, that's very frustrating. So not every child is the same. Secondly, when I look at the boundary changes, for instance, I see Albert Einstein, who is a feeder pattern to Redmond High School, yet they will be bused to Evergreen Junior High, which is a feeder pattern to Eastlake, and then back to Redmond High School. It is not logical to me. That means it's a number game. It's not about the students. Those kids will be disruptive. I have many other friends in the pattern who are experiencing this same thing, and I think why it's not a pact tonight, because people have given up. We feel like our voices are not being heard. And it's very difficult. And so I want you to take into account that these are children that are affected. And all of you mothers, fathers would fight for your children to do the best that they can, and I will do what it takes. If it means going out of the public to private, you're gonna lose some good people, because we are a stable community and we will be there, but I have a hard time participating in a school when I'm afraid that 4 years from now, it's going to happen again. So, thank you.
Thank you. So, John, do you have time to do a sidebar with them?
Actually, he's going to be part of the presentation.
He's part of the presentation, okay.
Yeah, so he's spoken with them.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, do we, sorry. No, that's all right. You're welcome to speak. No, you're the last person in the audience who I don't recognize, so.
Okay. Just because my concerns kind of piggyback what's already been talked about, but are coming at it from a slightly different angle. My name is Kimberly. Thank you for letting me speak. We live in a community that is directly on the boundary of Lake Washington and Snoqualmie School District. So we live on one side of the street, and the rest of our neighborhood is in Lake Washington, which we were as well until this year. And then they've not booted out, but they've had everybody go to their assigned school. So there is no more variancing in. So, you know, if you were going to a Lake Washington school and that was okay up till this point, so everybody's been shifted around and we're now in the Snoqualmie School District. It's far. I mean, we're far out. I have children with that need speech help, and we have to drive 40 minutes out to a school in North Bend that is serviced by Snoqualmie Valley Schools. 40 minutes each way for a half-an-hour speech lesson for each of my small children. Because that is a school district that they are saying that this is, you know, these boundaries were made in 1944. Okay, where we lived was complete rural. None of these houses exist, none of these communities existed. And now we're putting kindergartners on buses for at least 45 minutes to get to school. They're asleep every day when the bus comes back. It just took away the whole sense of community. And to be honest, I love the schools there. I think the schools are fantastic. I mean, we moved to the area because all the schools in this area were good. My issue is it took away the entire sense of community that we felt in our neighborhood, because the kids across the street are still in Lake Washington, and all of us on this side of the street are now, you know, busing way far out. And if I was choosing to send my kid to a public school, I mean, I have a kid who does ice hockey in Shoreline. That's a 40-minute drive. I complain about that all the time. Now I have to do even further sometimes just if my kid forgets her lunch, you know? It just took away the entire sense of community that we feel that a public school should have. So our community has reached out for legal counsel, and we have gone through this process before, but it is a very diligent community. And if I did have the maps to show you where we are on this cutoff, this boundary, it spans from way over on one side of the pass all the way out here, and we're way here, and this is all farmland in between. So we are literally this just one little section of houses over here. So we have obtained legal counsel, and we will be trying to pursue this to get the actual boundary changed, because it's just been so long. I mean, it piggybacks on what you guys are doing now, obviously. There's such an increase in population in this area. There's not enough schools. There's not enough transport. It's kind of a mess, but I think the whole boundary is an issue, not just inside Lake Washington. I mean, I think Snoqualmie has 3 different. In our area in the city of Sammamish, it feeds into 3 different school districts, and I don't know if that does that anywhere else. It feeds into Issaquah, it feeds into Snoqualmie, it feeds into Lake Washington. So the actual city, the actual boundaries, and we live in the city of Sammamish, but yet we go, you know, to way far out for public school. And so my case, my issue is just, we have lost, like they're saying as well, the sense of community. And it's all the school boundaries that I feel really need to be reevaluated. So while you guys are redoing the Lake Washington, I just wanted to make a note that I think we need to look at the bigger picture as well, because it's the kids who end up suffering. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Okay. I'm not seeing other folks who I don't see routinely. We will move on to our next agenda item, the consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved by Director Bernard, seconded by Director LaLiberty. Dr. Pierce, will you please poll the board?
Nancy,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Chris, Mark,
Yes.
Siri.
Yes.
Okay, and Dr. Pierce, will you please review the donations?
Yes, if you turn to tab 7, we have donations totaling $185,315 tonight. $140,000 from Lake Washington Schools Foundation to Lake Washington School District to support art docents, AVID, our Innovation Fund, Links, and our new teacher support program. So a very generous donation from the Schools Foundation. We have a $12,381 donation from Elizabeth Blackwell, PTSA to Blackwell Elementary, to provide stipends for running and basketball club and to purchase a sound system upgrade. $2,000 from Symetra to Franklin Elementary to support professional development. $1,890 from Margaret Mead Elementary, PTSA to Mead Elementary to purchase site licenses for IXL Math. $4,044 from Juanita PTA to Juanita Elementary to provide stipends for outdoor education. And finally, $25,000 from an anonymous donor to Environmental and Adventure School, EAS, to support their outdoor learning enrichment. So all total, tonight, $185,315 in very generous donations.
As always, a large and heartfelt thank you to our community for their support of the system. Without you, a lot of interesting things would not happen. Our next item on the agenda is program reports. So professional learning, or did I skip? I skipped. I skipped, yes, okay, sorry. My Freudian slip is showing. I really am missing just a line here. That's all right. So our first item is the non-consent. On the non-consent agenda is the boundary recommendations. There we go. Dr. Pierce, I believe this is John's. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, is she okay?
Yep, car's over.
Oh, Mark, I'm so sorry.
See you later.
Excuse me.
Yep.
Do you need any help from us?
Director Stewart is leaving for a personal emergency, so he is excused with haste. All right, so with that, Dr. Pierce, we're on to the final recommendation.
Great, thank you. Before I formally read the situation recommendation, I just wanted to provide an opportunity for Dr. Holman. As you know, Dr. Holman facilitated the boundary process, for us to just highlight for the board what has occurred since the full presentation was provided to the board with the boundary recommendation, and that occurred on November 6th. So we wanted to highlight just a few of the things that have happened since. Then I will read the situation recommendation, and then the board obviously will have time for discussion and action, and then following action, we'll get into just one slide highlighting again what the next steps are after this evening. So John's here to help provide any additional context and help to answer questions given his firsthand involvement in the process for these many, many months. So as the board knows, we've presented the formal recommendation, which is my recommendation, superintendent recommendation for the boundary, and that occurred on November 6th. We had a study session that evening and then a formal presentation here at the board meeting. There were a number of questions that board members raised during study session and also that we heard during public comment that evening prior to the formal recommendation being presented. So following the November 6th meeting, the Boundary Committee did reconvene. The Boundary Committee reconvened to review the questions that were posed by both board members and community members and to review feedback that was shared in public comment or came in subsequently through email. And responses to those questions were that board members posed were developed and provided back to the board and to parents and posted on the Boundary website, so we could provide responses to some of the questions that people posed. And then John and I met after the Boundary Committee reconvened to review and determine if there would be any changes to their formal recommendation, and there were not any formal changes to the recommendation, so no change in what the board has seen since that November 6th presentation. So John and I met as the chair of the committee. He presented me with the committee's final recommendation. I considered that, again, reviewed again, the questions that were posed, the answers that were posed. And so what I'm bringing you tonight is my recommendation for boundary. It is the recommendation of the committee that was presented to me. I've made no changes in that recommendation. And again, there's been no changes to the recommendation since what you saw on November 6th. So it's presented to you tonight as part of our process for board action, and you have a situation recommendation on tab 8. It's rather lengthy and highlights all of the particulars that are included in the presentation, so the board has all of that in tab 8. I'm just going to read highlights from the situation introduction and then read the recommendation, so then the board can discuss and take action. So just as a reminder, a boundary committee was formed in January 2017. So this group's been working for many, many months. And the purpose of the committee is to recommend school attendance areas, including placement of district programs as part of this process. We all know the district, thanks to the support of our community and the passage of the 2016 bond measure, we are building 2 new elementary schools and a new middle school in the Redmond area to accommodate our growing enrollment. We all know this is our 10th straight year of enrollment growth. We're growing at the rate of about 700 students per year, so we are experiencing significant and rapid growth, and the new schools are needed in our system to accommodate this growth. The boundary committee was charged with drawing the attendance boundaries for the new schools in Redmond as well as existing schools in Redmond to distribute enrollment across the learning community. We have overcrowded schools in the Redmond learning community, as we do in some of our other learning communities, and when we build new schools, we have the opportunity to not only determine boundaries for those new schools, but to also distribute enrollment more evenly across the learning community and ease overcrowding for all of our schools. Parents provided feedback throughout this entire process, and criteria was used by the committee to propose scenarios, put those scenarios out to parents and community members for input and feedback, and then take that into consideration as new iterations and new scenarios were developed as a result. At the May open house, the boundary committee did present 3 scenarios to the community for review and feedback. A public comment period was available between May 4th and May 19th. The committee did review all the community feedback and did make adjustments to meet the charge to align with the boundary criteria. 4 scenarios were developed and then presented to the community in September. Public comment at that point in the process was open between September 26th and October 2nd. And after continued review and analysis, the boundary committee then published 2 revised scenarios in an online open house beginning October 25th. Comment for those scenarios was then available from October 25th through the 30th. Finally, the boundary committee analyzed and reviewed all feedback from the online open house in order to develop their final recommendation. The boundary committee's final recommendation was based on alignment with the boundary criteria, all of which are not considered, they're considered both discretely and as a whole. Ensuring enrollment was distributed across the Redmond area and considering feedback from each comment period. Final recommendation was presented to me on November 3rd, and as we already reviewed, that recommendation was then presented to the board formally at the November 6th board meeting. I've already highlighted the fact that the board is receiving a recommendation that does not reflect any changes from November 6th. And so the recommendation this evening is for the Board of Directors to approve the superintendent's recommendation regarding boundary adjustments, program changes, grandfathering, and variances for the Redmond area elementary and middle schools. Elementary school attendance areas will be implemented beginning with the 18-19 school year Middle school attendance areas will be implemented beginning in the 1920 school year. High school attendance areas will be implemented beginning with incoming ninth grade students in the 1920 school year. So that is the recommendation, and now it's on the table for the board to consider and discuss and take action upon.
I'll move approval to get it on the table.
I'm sorry, I
I said I'll move approval of the recommendations to
Starts our
get it on
conversation.
the table for discussion.
no, thank you, and I'll second that.
Okay. So before we move on to any voting, any further questions for Dr. Holman or Dr. Pierce?
I just have one question to clarify. My understanding is that area that was moved in 2015 in the prior reboundary, that if I look at the FAQs, there was a piece that we talked about that if you were moved in the prior boundary, there was an option to seek variance. And if I've read correctly, it says it would be guaranteed for incoming fourth graders. Is that correct? Could you clarify exactly what I said, though, because I don't think that was coherent.
So we recognize
Thank you.
there's a few neighborhoods that in this process were also moved in the 14-15 process for the 15-16 school year. We looked at which grade levels those would be, and so that is current third graders going into fourth grade, typically grandfathering in a boundary process. And what we recommended in the final recommendation was current fourth grade students to be grandfathered and next year's seventh grade students to be grandfathered, since that would be going into the 1920 school year. Recognizing that students would potentially be moved twice, we did make a consideration and guaranteeing a variance for families who have students in third grade, that this would be their second boundary change because of the district's processes and allowing those students to remain at their current school.
And where you'll see that specified is on page 20, so under tab 8 in the recommendation under elementary variance.
I think two more pieces to that. We also provided a recommendation to the board that additional consideration for a middle school variance pending space availability, and that's at Evergreen Middle School because that's the only middle school that these students are currently attending or would attend that were shifted in the 15-16 school year. And we added that same language to our high school variance recommendation as well.
Okay. And so is this an opt-in or an opt-out for parents
And
of
so,
affected students?
so for our students that this would be their second move, and that's only elementary
Right.
students, we're actually going to identify those students within our data system and directly reach out to those families.
Okay. So you should be,
So it's still a choice, but they will get a personal invitation so they don't miss it in the flow.
Personal choice, and we're asking families just to complete the variance paperwork because that's what helps us track students remaining at a school beyond 1 year.
right. So anyway, after we're done with it, get the details. All right.
Can I ask one more
You
question?
stole my good question. so-
Can I just clarify?
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Details will be sent out to families in December.
Okay.
We're still determining all of the details around grandfathering and that variance consideration, how we're going to communicate it, when that's going to be communicated, and all of that.
Okay. And, yeah, so Siri does have one more. I wanted to reiterate the point that this is, we're aware that transitions matter for students and multiple transitions. We already worry about how many transitions there are just between elementary and middle and high school. So for kids who would be moved twice in their elementary school career, we are fully aware that that's a knot that we're trying to untie. It's not part of the final boundary recommendation. It's a loophole that we're trying to help you drive through. So with that, Siri, you're
I'm not sure it's a question, so I guess I don't have any more questions. It's more a
You
discussion
have a
piece.
rhetorical statement? Okay, go for it.
In the process that after this is just to make sure that we did have some feedback that came in after that initial presentation. And we have responded to those all directly, correct? So that they have all heard that direct feedback to the questions. I know I spoke with some. And I just want to make sure that people do recognize it was heard, it was looked at, it was considered. And that's the component to it. It is not an easy decision because we do recognize the difficulty in going through it and trying to make these different components fit. There is the FAQ on there does give a little more clear explanation of some of those variance pieces that came in sort of after that came in through in February 6th in some of those questions. So that does explain some of those components. I guess that's it.
Yes, and this is something that those of us who have been through boundary processes before are familiar with. It's always tough at the end. There will always be families who are feeling hard done to. There is nothing personal involved in this. There is nothing where someone else advocated more effectively. It comes down to the least worst solution that's the best for the average child. And for better or for worse, the kids who do wind up being moved involuntarily, it is better for them to be moved to a new school than to continue with the overcrowding they've had at their existing schools. We've heard a lot about this reboundary process from the Redmond community. I am still catching an earful from the Lake Washington community about overcrowding that still exists over there. So unfortunately, the cure is not a all flowers and daisies. I do want to one more time acknowledge the hours that John and his team have put into this. I know that it is extremely hard to make this system work. Every time you move one piece, it moves another. You wind up trying to satisfy all of the components, and you wind up, at the end of the day, there are some things that are suboptimal. If we had our choice, we would never want any dirty feeder patterns. In my experience in the district, we have never had a point where the district has not had dirty feeder patterns from at least one school feeding into two different high schools or two different middle schools. It's just how the numbers work with the buildings that were allocated. But we do our best. That said, your best is not perfect, but it's very, very good, and it's far better than I could ever have achieved. So I appreciate the time and effort you guys have put into this, and frankly, the sleepless nights. I mean, for the team on the ground, many of your team actually have kids in the schools and are very cognizant of what happens when you move things around. So anyway, we've done our best with the final recommendation to build in loopholes and waivers, things like grandfathering in kids so that they can finish out at the same school that they started at if they're 1 year shy of graduating. If they're 2 years shy, then we've got some options. But building things in so that they take some of the pressure off and some of what can feel like a personal catastrophe out of the equation. This is a standard procedure where we can't make everything work perfectly, but we try to give everyone little pieces that help us solve at the end for the system. And that is time-consuming. It is hard. I have been very impressed by the ability to look at the system this time. I remember my greatest regret in the last cycle being having to move some learning centers. This cycle, you managed to prevent that particular move. I am thrilled by that. All of the kids matter a lot, but moving a learning center can be disruptive to those children in ways that I don't like to think about. So with that said, any other questions or rhetorical statements to make on this? I get to go last. Yeah, Nancy, it's her last board meeting. She gets to have the last word. You want no word?
No, I lost that.
Okay.
Okay, then
Nancy?
she wants the last one. I have to say
Okay, I was
something
gonna
before
say,
she
go for it,
does.
Siri, yeah.
Sorry. At that same time, there's a lot to thank in our community input that has come in and through that feedback. This whole process, multiple things have been changed in a big picture. There were things that were started at the initial beginning that have really drastically changed as we've gone through it. And that is in part, and thankfully for our community, saying those feedback and that was pulled in. that was a vital component. Unfortunately, not all of it comes through in the final piece, and that's probably the hardest component to actually deal with. And that is a huge value and something that, so I want to thank our community for actively engaging and for coming and for giving their opinion and doing it multiple times when they felt it was necessary. There's one part of the process that I do think we need to think about, and this was in discussion with people, and this will be in future going forward for sort of a improvement component, is how do we, when feedback is, input is given and is not shown in what comes forward, how do we make sure we communicate that clearly as to why and the reasons behind it so that that piece comes forward? That was some of the frustration that I heard. And so the more we can think about how we handle that in the process, I think that will help just improve what we do. So I just want to make sure that that got put in.
And having been through this 3 times now, I can say, with each cycle, we do improve, but with each cycle, we learn new things that we can do to improve the next cycle round. There's going to be a whole lot more of this if we're successful in the bond cycle. So this is something where we're learning as we go, improving as we go, and perhaps not perfect, but doing our darndest to be perfect. So Nancy, the final word is yours.
You guys have summarized it up very well. I was just, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have no idea how many times, but my first meeting or my first vote, significant vote as a board member, was against a boundary change because I was not happy with what I saw as the process, but I was brand new to the board and hadn't been there at the beginning. So I have advocated for years for changes. I am very pleased with the process that was gone through this time. I think we have gotten better each time. I think we will continue. Janine is gone. She was here earlier. What I told her when I first got elected to the board is we should have an engineer and they should just draw the lines according to engineering. That obviously didn't work and still doesn't quite work, but we have our criteria. Mine has always been most walking and shortest transportation, but it is difficult. We don't lay our neighborhoods out in neat little bits. I do think this process this time was very good. We did get more community feedback than I have ever seen before. I do think it was all considered. Unfortunately, as has been said, it cannot all be incorporated. It isn't possible. I think the question and answer, which, I did ask for that, although they probably were already planning on it anyway, will hopefully address the concerns of people who cannot see. It's obvious that whenever anybody makes a suggestion, it seems incredibly logical to them. And what is difficult is fitting all those logical pieces together. It is extremely difficult. And frankly, since we ended up buying a house long before we had children, less than 2 blocks from an elementary school, I never had to face this personally. And I really didn't realize that when we bought our house, that for other parts of the county or the district, things would be different. I do have to, since we're being nostalgic here with my last meeting after 20 years, Jackie and I still remember when we almost came close to closing a school because of declining enrollments. And believe me, that was agony. That's when 728 was passed and we were able to lower class size, so then we needed more space. Now we'd like lower class size, but we're growing so exponentially that it's hard to get the class space. So I guess just to cut it short, I will vote for this one. I do think the district has really gotten much better at this. I think John's leadership in this and Tracy's has been very good, and Barbara, and others who are not here tonight. So I have to admit, I had a good laugh when I found out I'd be taking this vote on my last meeting. But I think it's as good as you could get done. And the grandfathering will help ease the pain. And communities will continue to grow. Fortunately, there's still soccer. That's how my kids got to know lots of people outside of their little school area. Thank you.
Well, I promised you to have the last word, so I won't. But I
It's
will
hard,
second the
isn't it?
soccer thing. By 7th grade, we've got 5 elementary schools on one team of boys.
Yes, I
So,
know, that's what happens. By the time
it
they're in
happens.
high school,
But-
they're
All right.
reaching out.
So with that, anyone else willing to try and take the last word from Nancy? I didn't think so. So it's been moved by Director Bernard and seconded by Director Liberty that we adopt the superintendent's recommendation regarding the boundary adjustments. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries. So we're on to and Nancy, I want you to know, we're 3 minutes ahead of time. Our
before
next
we-
agenda item is
Learning.
program
You're
reports.
getting there.
Before we go on to the next agenda item, we do just want to remind everyone of the next steps, and these next steps were shared at the November 6th meeting. But following final action by the board this evening, we are planning for district communication to be sent to all families, informing them that the board has acted and the boundary decision has been made. As John mentioned earlier, on November 28, a follow-up communication will come from buildings, and that will be sent to current families. This follows the same process that we have in previous boundary processes. And then communication to eligible families regarding grandfathering will occur prior to winter break. And of course, we want to help the transition to new schools be positive for students and their families. And so we are already beginning to plan for those transition activities, which will occur during the spring. So our building principals are a big piece of that process. And I do want to also acknowledge, in addition to John for his work in facilitating the boundary committee, and Barbara for her work and serving on the committee and doing a lot of the data, and her team, a lot of the data work. Also Jeff Miles, our transportation manager, for all of the work that he put in addition to all of our principals. We do have one principal here this evening, so thank you, Steve, for being here. And they, as a team, just worked extraordinarily hard to put together what was the final recommendation this evening. And no one takes this lightly. Everyone understands that it's not just numbers and data, it's students and families. And that's why it's a lengthy process, and that's why we don't just hire a data person, right, Nancy, to put the, to just draw the lines, because we do know that we're talking about people and families and students. So I just want to say a big thank you to all of the principals and everyone who served on the boundary committee. So that's our communication and transition plan, and so we will be working on that as we move forward.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
All right. And again, thank you, Dr. Holman. So our next agenda item is program reports, and
Great. Yes, so we actually had a program report and a superintendent's report that we moved from the last meeting to tonight. These are both very brief reports, 10 minutes each. We did not. Tonight's program report is on professional learning. So this is our annual opportunity to provide an update to the board, in addition to what update you receive as part of an EL or an executive limitation. Particularly EL 9 focuses on district staff. So this is another opportunity for us to show some highlights and share some accomplishments of the year. And it's also a way for us to try to continue to connect the ELs, the means, to the ERs, the ends. We believe strongly in investing in professional learning for all staff, and we have a theory of action that student learning will improve as we continue to invest in professional learning and developing the capacity of the people in the system who work with students. And we're always working on learning as an organization as well about how we can better support professional learning to better support student learning and get the outcomes that we want for students. So this is a big piece of our learning agenda, and as a learning-focused organization, which is one of our core values, professional learning is key. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Matt. And again, it's a brief program report with some updates.
Thank you for the opportunity to do this. Similar to what we did last year in terms of format, we organized this presentation to really be what are we doing to support overall professional learning for administrative staff, and then you're going to see certificated staff, and then followed by classified staff. For our administrators who are new to the district, these programs are largely coordinated by our directors of school. They are coordinated by our directors of school support. So for anyone that's new to the district as an administrator, there's a new administrator orientation, and then followed up with monthly new administrator meetings. New building principals will be meeting with their directors of school support weekly for check-ins, and we also give them an opportunity to have a colleague that they can connect with in terms of job alike. All of our DLT, in terms of ongoing professional learning, you'll see in a later slide, heavy focus on equity, and we'll fill in some of the details of what that looked like. Also, besides district leadership teams that are engaged in professional learning, our learning communities also, as well as level meetings, spend time on professional learning. And then, of course, there's the individual professional learning that takes place through principals, professional growth, and evaluation. It's an example of our new administrator orientation. I'm going to highlight now several of these programs. The purpose is to orient new administrators as part of the induction to the district. Last year we had 19, this year we had 14 administrators during the August 2 days. We also run in August a Summer Leadership Institute. This is really geared toward any principal, not just new principals. In fact, it's all administrators as well as teacher leaders. As they're getting ready to plan for the year in August Leap Week, they focus, as you'll see there, on designing professional development with adult learning theory in mind, because that's what they're doing during August Leap Week, is a lot of professional learning with their staffs. This year we had 44 participants in that one-day experience. As I mentioned, our district leadership team last year spent a day and a half in sessions that were facilitated by our Puget Sound Educational Service District. The focus was on equity and, of course, meeting our interest in providing every student equitable access to all opportunities in our school system. I'm going to take the various areas of certificated staff and, I'm sorry, you're getting an echo, that's off, so maybe I need to step back a little bit. We're okay, all right. So as this first part, which was the slide I jumped over, is the certificated staff is what we're going to take next, since we just finished administrators. So new to the district for many, many years, we're very fortunate to have our Educator Introduction Academy each August. Teachers who are new to our district, novices in their first 2 years, are spending their first year with a consulting teacher that they are assigned to for some pretty intensive support. In year 2, that gradually release of support weans off a bit, but they still do have a consulting teacher assigned to them. As teachers go through the system and still are novice, but moving beyond 2 years to 3 and 4 years, there's professional learning coaches that are available, professional certification support for renewal of their certificates, as well as professional learning classes, trainings, seminars that are offered through our professional learning series. And then beyond 4 years, as that continuum goes further out, 5+ years, we also offer our professional learning coaches for support, national board certification support that takes place, and the continuation of professional classes. Here's an example of our Educator Introduction Academy from this year. Our numbers continue to rise. We keep filling more and more people inside of Lake Washington, where it's held. We had 271 participants this year. It spans 7 days. It involves many of our administrators across the system in terms of central leadership in providing a variety of knowledge and skills in curriculum standards, the instructional framework, and other expectations. Our new teacher support program I already mentioned. To highlight this, it's teachers new to the profession. That first day, first week workshop in year 1, weekly mentoring meetings, observation practice cycles, so they're really getting intensive support in setting them up for success. The second year, they have monthly connection meetings with their consulting teacher. The classes and workshops are offered in group settings. They also have peer-to-peer visits taking place. As you can see, this past year in 17-18, we had fewer than there were the year before, 118 first year, but 137 slightly more second year teachers with a 1-13 consulting teacher to teacher ratio. Here is the professional certification and certification renewal that begins after 2 years. So we support participants through the process of helping them move through their residency to professional certificate. We had 81 participants last year and 78 the prior year. National board certification, I'm dropping to a total in the district right now. As you see, there's 208 teachers that have their national board certification. We have had 87 participants in 16-17. Our professional learning coach program, as I mentioned, is offered to all of our teachers. It's a program that's designed to help teachers differentiate. It's helping them with how to use data. It's helping them with how they are teaching various processes. I know there was an emphasis in involving them in some of the writing work that we did with our elementary teachers to help support and coach that work. We had 389 teachers participate in that in the past year, up from 259 the previous year. You've heard me mention these professional learning opportunities. These are classes, workshops, study groups, cohort groups. About 1,209 attendees last 16-17 year took advantage of that opportunity. We move into classified staff. Similar to certificated, there's phases of induction when they are first hired by the district with a new employee orientation, are given job-specific training so they could be successful in whatever role they are in. Continuing that throughout their tenure with us, there's job-specific training such as workshops, roundtables, classes, and one-on-one support. Certifications such as Microsoft certification that's expanding their professional skills also takes place as they are still continuing with us. Here's highlighting our office professionals and the training that we do there. Last year we had 125 participants that participated in the office professionals workshop. 703 took advantage of the classes that are outside of the workday, and 54 participants participated in health room and secretaries training. Our instructional assistants provide training for them in working with classroom teachers that they're supporting. We had classes in restorative practices. So as the case was mentioned earlier in a different context, they too are learning to use those same practices, whether they're IAs on the playground or helping in classrooms, so that they're supporting in a similar vein as our other certificated staff. Last year, we had 232 participants attend the Instructional Assistants Training Day, and 379 took advantage of the after-school classes. Our paraeducators, all of our paraeducators participate in this, so it's not a number there because everyone is involved in this training. This is job-embedded mentoring support to help them as they're working with students in classrooms. A couple of comments about outcomes that we see. We know that mentoring and staff development and teacher inductions are 3 methods that are identified in the literature that truly help retain teachers over the long haul. When we talk about the support that's given early on to ensure that teachers stay the course and continue through their careers, this is really important, and we measure that in various ways.
I just want to interject one
Sure.
thing on the next, on the previous
Bravery,
slide.
okay.
One of the questions that our human resources team and people who are on at job fairs and during recruiting season get asked is about what professional learning support do you have in place? And one of the things that frankly differentiates our district from other districts is our new teacher support program and some of the things that we have in place, which are funded through the Educational Programs and Operations Levy. So there really is critical
Correlation.
for our mission and vision to be able to provide that support to teachers, and one of the things they ask about when we are recruiting.
We gather some data at the end of the 2 weeks of Educator Introduction Academy. This is last year's. These 4 questions were asked Frankly, I was concerned about how many were answering that they disagreed when you see 16% twice, saying they didn't feel that they left properly prepared. And so in my conversations with our director of professional learning, I said, what's going on there and what are we doing about it? Not just that it's a number, but how are we following up? One of the key things he told me was it's the first year that would serve as a baseline year where they had every participant take it during a session. In previous years, it was left to volunteers, teachers who chose to complete the survey. So we were not getting an apples and apples comparison. I said, that's fine, but my so what is still there. And he said, this is a part of work they do in their professional learning advisory to follow up with teachers to want to get better understanding of what's behind that number. What is it that could improve it so that they can make improvements for the coming year. So those were two things that I know were on my mind when I saw this slide and asked them further questions, and I'm sure they would be on yours as well. Professional Learning Coach program is very highly regarded. You could see the numbers over 3 years when asked what was their experience like in working with a coach. And I think I've done that in 10 minutes, Tracy, or tried to.
Okay, here's the Alzheimer's thing. It's so good how far we've come. I mean, we were doing this before I was even on the board, but it's gotten so much better. And yes, without the support of our community through the levies, we couldn't do it. And that is key to supporting our staff and providing great education.
And Matt, you're improving at anticipating our questions, because that 16% was the only question I had. Siri?
Delay.
I'd agree, you caught mine.
All right. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
And SUPES report, or have we got another program?
No, we do not have another program report. Barbara, typically, though, we schedule in as part of superintendent's report an annual enrollment and demographic update. So we do have that as superintendent report part 1 tonight, and then I have one item for superintendent report part 2. So we'll let Barbara begin the presentation.
All right, good
For
evening.
enrollment and demographics.
And apologize, the date still says November 6th, but here we go. So I've got just some data tonight on our enrollment statistics and demographics. So this chart shows the history of our October 1 head count. So first looking at, so we have elementary, middle school, and high school broken out with a subtotal, and then it also includes our Skills Center program and our Emerson K-12 program. So our total enrollment for 17-18 is 29,572, which is a 566 student increase. So we've had in the last 4 years since 2013, our enrollment has grown 3,524 students, or 13%. These figures do not include our running start figures. That has increased over 87% in the same time period, from about 300 to 568 students. So as you can see, also the last 2 years, we were growing about 4%, and so we've leveled a little bit back down to 2% this year.
Can I just ask a quick question on the running start piece? Mm-hmm. If they are half-time running start and half-time in the schools, in our school,
they're still counted, so that's a head count number.
so they're still in this head count, or no?
Sorry, yes, if they are part-time high school, part running, then they are in this head count.
Only if they're full-time running start,
yes.
oh, they're also, so we have an increase in full-time running start.
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Did
Yeah.
we have more of an increase this year because of Juanita? That's what I heard, that some of the kids were just,
Oh, specifically at Juanita, I don't know off the top of my head specifically at Juanita. Let's see, what I do know is we grew 17% this year and 29% over 2 years. So we did have a greater increase this year, just slightly. So
The other contributing piece
but-
of that, which we'll need to follow up, is the new Central Washington University campus in Sammamish that is, within walking distance to Eastlake High School, and they are offering Running Start courses. And when I inquired, I went to their grand opening and so forth, and we've been in contact with them all throughout their planning process. I believe we have about 50 students enrolled in at least part-time Running Start at Central, so we'll just need to
So
follow
it's right up
and-
there on the plateau. I didn't realize that.
Right, it's within walking distance to both Eastlake High School and Skyline High School in the Issaquah School District.
So that would make it more convenient.
Correct, yeah. So, okay, the next slide shows our budgeted head count versus our actual October head count. So as you can see here, we are down overall, just at the if you compare the subtotal, 324 students, and you can see at elementary, we're down about 89, and that was actually a little bit expected. We actually increased our budget later in the spring because due to this is our second year with full all-day kindergarten, and so registrations are still a little bit, we don't have a pattern, we haven't developed a pattern yet, so we bumped up our budget with our kindergarten, not in case more students came, and we actually didn't receive about the 100 students we were looking at. So that was actually a little bit expected. The high school number, we were right on at middle school, and then at high school, we're down 242 students. Some of that is due to Running Start, but not all of it. So, it's, we're continuing to look at that and refine our projections given that. So, but it is 324 students is within 1%, and that is completely reasonable for a district our size. So, Nancy?
Never mind, I just read the title on the last slide. It was October 1. This was head count as of October 1.
This is October 1.
Which is
And-
the official numbers we report to the state, correct?
Correct. And as you know, we are funded on average annual FTE, so we will have an analysis. We're looking at, impacts to revenues and expenditures for that. And the Skills Center, I just want to note, Skills Center is receiving a lot more students during the summer program, and they're not counted in here. So the budget actually reflects the whole year, and we haven't received yet the summer program. So that 406 really by the end of the year should be closer to the budgeted figure. So this is just a slide showing our enrollment history and our growth.
It looked different if it was 20 years.
So, and then this is the 6th largest district showing in 14-15, we were 6th largest district out of Seattle, Spokane, Tacoma, Evergreen, and Kent. In 15-16, we jumped 2 places to 4th largest. Then 1 year later, we jumped to 3rd largest, and that's where we remain this year is 3rd largest. We're about 1,000 students below Spokane, so we may be there in 2 years. So. Sure,
They're growing too. But not as fast as we are.
Actually, Spokane declined from last year. They lost 100 students, so.
Oh, that's interesting.
They grew, yeah, so interesting.
Because they're,
I've rarely been happier to be
Building.
number 3 instead of number 2.
What's that?
I'm very happy to be number 3.
Happy with number 3, yeah.
3 is just fine, huh?
3 is just fine. And then here's some demographic data. So this chart shows our ethnicity and race and the change in percentage compared to 2012. So you can see our Hispanic Latino population has grown slightly. Our Asian population has grown from 18% to 28%. Our Black African American has stayed relatively the same. 2 or more races has grown from 5.8 to 7.7. So those are just, and these are preliminary 2017 numbers. And then our ELL program data, for the first, we've been having double-digit increases in ELL for many years, and we finally slowed down with our ELL growth, and it's still about a 9% of our total district enrollment, and we've grown 67% over the 5 years.
You can ask.
Oh.
Any hypothesis? Can you speculate for me as to why that's the case, Tracy?
You know, as I think about this, I think one thing to keep in mind is that, so the process for identifying English learner students is for students to complete, parents to complete a home language survey. That indicates if a language other than English is spoken in the home. If the parent indicates yes to that question, then that begins a process to assess the student to see if the student qualifies and needs English learner services. So it's interesting that while our demographics are changing, I think potentially that our students are learning English in the home along with their parents. So if you're here, from Microsoft, you're from India, I'm just using that as an example. There's potential that the family, yes, is speaking a language other than English, but the student has acquired enough English not to qualify for English learner services. So I just think as I've looked at the data and thought about why is our demographic changes, but we're slowing down a bit, that's my hypothesis anyway. That just we have fewer students requiring English learner services.
Right, it's just fairly significant fairly quickly. So the question is, have we had time to assess and know who is at ELL at this point? You were saying is that already done, all the home language survey?
And I think, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a little bit of change in the test this year too. So there was a change in the testing methodology, and so that could have changed that also.
So,
I can't speak to the details on that, but.
What's happened in Bellevue?
well,
and
our
North
district
Shore?
has an interesting mixture in its ELL program in that we've got engineers and then we've got some low-income housing. Just in a board brief, can you break this out within the ELL program by low-income versus non-low-income for growth?
We could see
I
what
think
we
we
can
should be
do.
able to do that. We'll follow up and provide some additional information if there's any other hypotheses about,
I mean, this is an interesting.
the data. Yeah, it is interesting, and so let us get with Callie on that and just see what kind of follow-up we can provide.
I mean, I would be curious, Bellevue, North Shore, Issaquah,
Yeah,
are they seeing similar changes that have occurred?
yeah.
Because it can drive a lot of program stuff.
It may be that some of these kids are coming from countries that are starting foreign language acquisition really young, which is such a wonderful idea.
So.
The other thing that just occurs to me, can you go back for a moment? Yeah, this is not just new students, but so this would
No,
also
this is total.
account for students who have out of
Right.
English
So
learner
it's
program,
X,
right?
Yes.
So that's
that-
the other thing that we'll just have to dig
We can
into,
get
because
some
we are,
exited data.
as we've talked about with ERs and students who exit EL program and how early they come in and how quickly they can matriculate out of program, that might be some of what's happening here too. So we can see if we can kind of ferret out new to the system versus students who've exited continuing and exited continuing stay.
And I don't know how much the pain to value equation, whether it's worth the energy, but if it's not too much pain, it'd be interesting to know if this is consistent across grade levels. Are we seeing it flattening at the elementary level or just all across the system?
Well, that's fairly easy to do.
Yeah, we
We
can
do
do that.
track it by grade level, so. Okay, in our special education program, a slight decrease this year in enrollment, very small. And then our percentage of special ed students to total enrollment went to dropped to 9.9%. So that's one of our lowest percentages in the last few years. So. And then the last slide is our free and reduced eligibility. That also declined about 5.8% and is 11.2% of our total. So it's declining.
I apologize, but I actually, is that a moving bar dependent on your local circumstance, or is it just an absolute bar for free and reduced?
No, it's
Siri?
it's in same across our district. The income levels have to be a certain
So
level.
I've got a
and
hypothesis as to,
yeah,
It's the federal poverty level,
Yep,
so it's working
federal.
off 185% of federal poverty.
okay. That is the conclusion, so.
Okay.
Any other
Well,
questions
we'll
for Barb?
definitely follow up and get you some more information on the questions that you raised.
great.
Great. Okay.
I hadn't really taken a look at those numbers before on our enrollment compared to the other 6 districts. And the basic, they're not growing.
They're not growing like we are.
I hadn't realized that. I think of them all as growing because I think of everything growing in the state, but compared to
no.
us, none of them are growing.
Yeah. All right, so the second half of the super's
Yeah, so the
report?
second half of superintendent's report isn't reflected on the agenda because I think I was just in a little bit of denial. I knew Nancy's reception was this evening, but for some reason I didn't have it in my head that this was actually her last board meeting. And so when she mentioned, I said, what? What do you mean it's your last board meeting? And
I fully expect that the validation is due on the 28th, so they must be able to get you your notice by the 4th.
And so while we obviously look forward to welcoming a new board member to the team, I wanted to take just a moment tonight to recognize Nancy and highlight a couple of the things that I shared at the reception this evening. So we had a wonderful reception. We had all of our current board members, our future board member, and many of our past board members, as well as community members there at the reception tonight.
All of
to
them
honor
going back a long
long
time.
time.
I believe it was more than 120 years of board member
You
experience.
added it up.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, so pretty incredible. So Nancy was elected to the board in 1997, and she has faithfully served the community and the district as a board director for 20 years. In that time, she has attended what I calculated to be around 460 board meetings and study sessions. She's met with countless stakeholders and constituents. She's provided valuable insight and support to 5 superintendents, including me, and she's touched the lives of untold thousands of students with her leadership. It's really hard to imagine the board without Nancy, and as I shared earlier, in many ways she represents the end of an era. We have had a number of board members serve 30, 25, 20 years, and Nancy is one of those board members. And the others have gone on to retire from the board before you. And so now Nancy's moving to join that group, and I consider this group to be the Lake Washington School District Hall of Board Member Fame for service. We've been really fortunate to have so many board members serve for so long. And so losing another board member that has that, that many years of service, 20 years of service, is difficult. You know what we've tried, what we've done, you know what has worked and what hasn't worked, and so, it's hard to say goodbye. And we thank you for leaving us in a good place. You've shared your wisdom, your wit, your knowledge, your common sense, and you really leave your legacy of love of public education and students with us. So I want to thank you personally for all that you have given of yourself over the last 20 years. I don't know that everyone knows that, except for the people who are sitting up here, knows how serving as an elected official, a board member in particular, is not easy. Board directors give of their time, energy, and commitment. They spend their evenings in study sessions and board meetings, evenings that others spend watching Seahawk games and spending time with family, and they sacrifice themselves for the betterment of students, and that contribution is noteworthy and significant. Public service of this kind is incredibly important, and it's typically underappreciated. So Nancy, I want to ensure that you know how much I appreciate you in everything that you've done. Appreciate all you've given over the past 20 years. I'm really glad I've been able to serve alongside of you as superintendent for the past 6 years, and I'm going to miss you. And thank you for everything.
Conveniently, board member comments is our next section. Go for it.
Nancy, it's been excuse me, I'm giving you a cold on your way out the door.
No, I'm going this way.
Yeah, let me scoot this way. It's been a pleasure sitting next to you for these last couple of years. I'm sorry that I'm ending it with germs.
Hopefully it's the one I had 2 weeks ago.
I've learned a lot from you, and I've benefited greatly personally in my ability to serve as a board member by having served with you. So thank you for everything, and thank you for your wisdom and your kindness. It really means a lot.
I'm not sure there's much more left to say besides, again, thank you for your time. I always appreciated the quick quip that would come in at different times as things were being discussed. So that was always enjoyable. So again, appreciate all that you have done and having the opportunity to get to know you and your belief in public education and that all kids can learn, and dual language immersion being vitally important. So glad to hear. Enjoy your retirement.
So I usually would try to embarrass someone at this point, but Nancy, it has been so much fun over the years to work with you. Even when you drove me nuts, it was still a pleasure to work with you. Your ability to really want to finish on time and yet digress onto your favorite topic is exceptional. But well, I wish you had done it slightly more briefly some evenings, but you've gotten better at it over the years. And the last decade, I have learned a lot from you. So all I can really say is we're going to miss you. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your passion. And thank you for being such a good example for all of us.
Well, thank you all. You've been very kind. I must admit, it will be bittersweet. We had a abbreviated study session before the meeting because the reception was so much fun. Having all those old timers and we are quite a group. We should do something. Most of us still live in the district, and many are still volunteering in the district. So that was fun. And then when you postpone the study session, and I won't be here for that next ongoing discussion and change, that's the poignant part, because I do feel very passionate about public education. I think I feel passionate about all education, but I've always said that if we taught everything I'd like to teach, we'd have much longer school days and longer school years. But we've been getting better every year. And I feel like you guys will do great. I've been on the board so much longer than Chris, who's the next longest serving, that it really does seem different. I was on the board 8 years as the newbie. 8 years as the newbie. So that part has changed. I am a proponent of, for the most part, long-term service on the board, although I did decide 20 years was certainly long-term enough. But I don't think people realize, and Cassandra has worked very hard since she decided to run for my position, to attend board meetings, attend work sessions, to do the training that WASDA provides, to talk to people and to really, she really will be able to hit the road running, which is really great. But even when you've done that, I don't think people realize there's just a huge learning curve. And when people ask me, I will say it is a good, often 4 years before you become really comfortable with the language, the terminology, the incredible complexity of budgeting. Not that we really understand it. That's why we have Barbara. And we are not the district administrators. We do not make those decisions, but we are the voice of the community and the guidance, and it's in our Constitution, it's in our state laws, and I think public elected school boards are extremely important to the future of public education. So it's been a huge privilege to serve for the past 20 years. I certainly didn't know when I first ran in '97 that I would still be here 20 years later, but it has been an honor and a privilege, so thank you all very much.
Thank you, Nancy.
Now I can go volunteer and do other things and be on committees. Yeah.
20 years on the school board and you haven't learned to say no to the sign-up sheet.
No, because now I have more time. When you're on the school board, you don't have time to do a lot of other things when you work full-time.
Thankfully, most of us find this fun in its own odd way.
In its own odd way, yes.
So, all right. Well, any other board member comments or follow-up?
Yes, I'd like to follow up on the ends results.
Yes.
I will admit that I did miss the fact that it was in the consent agenda, and I would prefer that in the future, we don't do that. It
I
should be on the
overlooked that
non-consent
myself.
agenda, because I did send you comments of what I wanted to discuss this evening along different lines of how that might be changed. So,
I would agree with that. I definitely think that when we have these things, we want to try and put them into the non-consent agenda after somebody's put them together, and we want to discuss and synthesize.
I think we missed that component is what my
Exactly.
concern is. So I don't know if we want to consider bringing it back, and I don't know.
I want to bring it back
Okay.
next cycle. Is
The one that we.
the math one.
Sure.
So we'll
The
discuss
next
it
meeting?
next meeting. Yeah.
Fine by me.
Okay.
I just think it's important that we have that final
I agree.
wrap-up.
No, I wholeheartably agree. I just feel like I had overlooked that piece of the agenda myself. I was looking for it in here, and it's like, so thank you for bringing that up.
Siri, I have a question for you on that.
Yeah.
What are you proposing? So we discussed the comments, the after-the-fact comments, or what?
The
type
final summary.
conversation
So we've gotten the draft summary that came out. And so then in my process of reviewing it, I had some questions of different components that maybe we want to look at and refinalize or.
Edit
so that we make
before we
sure it's a
adopt.
common voice of all being spoken before we approve it.
Okay, good. That's fine with me.
Yeah.
Great.
Perfectly reasonable. Okay, so our next board meeting is
Can I
December.
propose one other? Well, I'll do that
You are
later.
absolutely welcome to. I was trying to get Nancy. Oh, wait a minute, I'm way ahead of schedule, so
You're way
good.
ahead of schedule. The component, I had the opportunity at WASDA to talk again with some of the Federal Way school directors were part of this process, using some of what they had done. And the component that they do, I think that's advantageous prior, is an individual report. Basically, each individual board member just types up their notes, and then that comes to the person who is going to be writing it up so that they can help to draft and guide conversation and where there might be consensus and where there's not at the time that that presentation occurs to be able to work towards that draft. So that's something I would plant out there as something we think about as another way to enhance how the conversation goes at that time. So that
I
might
think
be further
systematizing it
discussion.
would be very helpful, so, yeah.
And now that we have two of us who've written a summary,
No, that's the whole thing. In the process of writing it, I was writing it off of memory, and then I'd try and go find the notes from various sources, and making it more formal on how we synthesize would be useful. So,
And you have, just checking, you did receive
I
the
got
notes
the
from
stuff
Diane.
from Diane, yes.
Okay. So
There's a difference between a transcript and the passion. And that summary of what your highlights are as an individual doesn't necessarily come through in the transcript. And it would be helpful. So, and it's not in any way dissing what you gave me. So, all right, anything else, Siri?
That is it at this point in time.
Okay, so our next board meeting will be December 4th at 5 p.m. We have a study session with topics on,
What tonight was, because.
the topic will be on,
Sorry, so we're editing as we go. Since we moved tonight's study session topic
right.
on school start times, that will be the topic of the next study session.
right,
And then we'll follow up on
Right.
bond and levy informational campaign in
At a further
other
date.
ways, which
Yeah.
was what was going to be the
Sounds
topic of
good.
the December 4th study session.
right. Okay, great. So at 5 p.m. we'll have the study session in the Hughes room next door. At 7 o'clock we'll have a regular board meeting here, including the scheduled, next board meeting will have the regularly scheduled comment session, right? Isn't that the first of the month? Yeah, okay. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, so one more time, it's been moved by Director Bernard and seconded by Director Liberty that we adjourn. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no opposition, motion carries, and the meeting is adjourned.